Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to let you know we're here. We've got about one more minute before we get started, so just bear with us. All right, it's 10 o'clock. We are going to give just one more minute or so for people to get logged on, but while we're waiting, I do want to let you all know that if you go to the handout tab on your screen, that you will be able to print out your certificate and also some handouts that I'm going to reference during the presentation this morning. And so that's where those are located for those of you who haven't done this with us before. And Kelly Peters is here with me. She's going to be running the chat box. So if you have any issues or questions, feel free to send those into her. And she's also going to be putting in links from some of the resources that I'm going to be referring to. So you can watch for those there. And of course, I'll remind you when the time comes. And I will be asking for some interaction from you all via the chat box as well. All right, so it is 10:01. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Casey Matthews, and like I said, I'm here with Kelly Peters, and I'm going to be leading this presentation this morning about looking at strong family relationships and sexual assault prevention, and looking at the connections. So just in case there are some of you out there who are new, I want to just make sure you know who we are. The Tennessee Coalition is a nonprofit here in the state of Tennessee, and we're statewide. Our mission is to end domestic and sexual violence and stalking in the state of Tennessee, and we do that via three main ways. We have a full-time lobbyist. We have a legal clinic here in the office that works with immigrant victims of domestic and sexual violence. And then we have a program specialist team which provides training and technical assistance across the state. So that's just us in a nutshell. And if you want more information about our organization, you can go to the tncoalition.org. So this morning we're going to be looking at primary prevention for just a few minutes here at the beginning, and then we're gonna really specifically drill down and look at the parents' role in prevention, and we're gonna look at some tools and resources for parents and professionals who work with parents. So with that, I'm gonna ask Kelly to launch a poll for us. I just want to know in the audience what hat you're wearing today. So are you wearing a hat as a parent or a caregiver? Are you a professional who works with parents or caregivers? Are you both? Or are you other, i.e. just kind of curious to hear what we're talking about? So if I'll give just a minute for that, were you able to launch that? Great. So we'll give a minute for people to respond. That will just help me shape the direction of the presentation this morning.
Okay.
So what are we seeing?
So we're looking at 11% parent, 22% professional who works with parents, 22% both, and 44% other/curious.
Okay, great. So we've got a lot of professionals who work with parents and a lot of boths and a lot of curiouses and a few parents or caregivers. All right, great. Thank you. That's helpful. So we're going to start by just talking about what we mean by prevention, and more specifically primary prevention. And so I'm going to show you a video, and it'll take me just a second here for it to come up. So let me click on that.
Hey, thanks for watching. Not going to take up much.
All right. Let me just get it turned up for you. All right, so this video is just going to talk a little bit about primary prevention.
I'm going to give you a quick summary of primary prevention of sexual violence and a few of the big ideas around it. So to begin, here's a quick story. So there's this guy fishing, right? And he sees someone floating in the water. It's dangerous out there, so he dives in to save him. He starts fishing again and doesn't think much of it. But then he sees someone else, so he has to dive in and save them too. He begins to realize he could be doing this all day. So he gets an idea. He should go upstream and figure out why people keep falling in. That story is really an allegory about primary prevention. That fisherman realizes he's not able to rescue every single person who falls into the stream, and that in order to have a real effect and to stop these things, he's going to have to go upstream to figure out why people are falling in. Maybe it's a broken bridge. Maybe it's a slippery bridge. In any case, if he can figure out the root cause, he can stop it. When we say primary prevention, we're really talking about something simple. We're talking about stopping sexual violence before it has a chance to happen. We're talking about moving upstream. And so we hear talk about these one-shot presentations that maybe they're not working, but certainly they're useful. They raise awareness. They might even recruit helpers or get stakeholders on board to be a part of our program or a part of our cause. But we know from people who study this stuff that it's not really moving upstream in the way that we would like. It doesn't have a significant attitude change. We don't see the kinds of behavior change that we would like to see in something that we would call prevention. So what's prevention? How do we know it's effective? What we're really after here is comprehensive strategies. So take that little fellow in the bubble there. The things that he brings to the table are his own knowledge, beliefs, and history. The ways that we can affect that individual just one-on-one is with education, is with building skill and giving him tools. Now, it's going to expand to the right a bit, and when it does, we'll see another level, another layer of influence, and a cat meowing. Okay, that was awesome. So one level out, strategies that address the relationship level will look at the influence of parents, siblings, peers, etc. Okay, and one layer out, we have community-level strategies that look at norms, customs, people's experiences with institutions like schools, churches, or the criminal justice systems. These might be some of your larger partnerships or big events. So then all the way out, we have the societal level strategies. These things address broad forces like inequalities, oppressions, belief systems, public policy, systems policy. So why the ecological model? It's one way to think about framing our activities in our prevention program so that they all reinforce one another and they reach people at different layers of the social ecology. That's just a big way of saying we get people in different ways and the messages reinforce one another. We have a way that does this kind of naturally called community development, but I won't go into that today, but if you're curious, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. Prevention needs to be relevant. It needs to be culturally relevant. It needs to be linguistically relevant. It needs to match the values of the community that you're working in. Literally, it needs to be of the people, by the people. We, again, have a method for doing this that involves people directly in the prevention activities that they're engaging in called community development, but I won't go into it. Prevention looks different in every community. It looks different in every area. It might look the same in two places. It's not going to look the same everywhere. The one big thing to think about is an illogical connection with going upstream. So saying, why am I doing this? What is the connection with prevention? What is the connection with what we're doing? That's the key here.
All right. So I feel like this video really kind of gets at the heart of prevention really well. And when we're talking about working with families and youth, if the goal is to go upstream, then working with families and youth is really the ultimate going upstream. And families and caregivers really have an opportunity to shape what kind of values and what a young person's sexuality looks like. And so in the same vein, we would say that, healthy sexuality is the antithesis to sexual violence. And we're going to talk really specifically about how families have the opportunity to communicate with their young people and to help shape those values. And when we talk about healthy sexuality, we're talking about interactions, sexual interactions and relationships that are entered into with a level of mutual respect, with a level of, understanding and accepting boundaries from the other person. So that's really what we're looking for. And if we want to figure out what are some of the things that we can be talking about in order to try and achieve a healthy sexuality or a healthy perspective on sexuality, then these are some of the things that we can look at. We can look at identifying some and talking about gender roles and kind of breaking down gender roles. We can talk about how we make sure that we always have consent and what real affirmative consent looks like. We have to constantly be critical and smart, educated consumers of media, because that shapes so much of the culture that we live in. And we have to be talking about, but not just talking about, but also modeling healthy relationships and what that looks like. And then the combat messages of shame is just kind of an umbrella. Shame and silence are such big issues for us in this work. You know, we have to create an environment where people can talk about sexuality, where they can talk about these things, and also where they can report if something does happen to them so that they can get the services that they need. So we have to also kind of be thinking about how we can be shame busters in this work. So for some of you, you're probably, you know, kind of ready to dig into exactly how we do that, and others might be more interested in looking at some of the literature that backs this up in terms of the primary prevention. So I'm going to take just a really quick, just another 5 minutes or so to look at what our research says according to the CDC, and then we're going to jump into the meat of how we do it and the resources. So in the video, he talked a little bit about the social ecological model, and what we know is that from a primary prevention standpoint, if we're going to actually impact society and change culture and shift from a rape culture to a culture of consent, then we have to look at doing primary prevention and kind of having interventions at each level of the social ecological model. And working with parents, young people, caregivers, this work really falls on that individual and that relationship level, because at the individual level, that's where we have the opportunity to impact a person's attitudes and beliefs and kind of shape what those core values are for them. And the relational level, that's where parents and families have the opportunity to kind of shape those values, but also to help build those skills around what it looks like to be in a relationship, how we understand and respect boundaries, skills for discussing consent, all of those things kind of fall in this individual and relationship level. So that's where we are when we're talking about working with families and caregivers. Now, according to the CDC, we have some really specific research about risk factors, and they look at risk factors from a perspective of what puts a person at risk for perpetrating sexual violence. And now, of course, just because a person has a risk factor, that does not mean that they're automatically going to become a perpetrator of violence. But we do know that there are some really specific things that can make it more likely that a person will perpetrate sexual violence. So when we're thinking about primary prevention, one of the things we have to keep in mind is what are those risk factors and how do we actually address those head on. So this is a visual that takes just a minute to kind of wrap your brain around here, but you can see that it's actually broken out by the social ecological model, again, with individual, relational, community, and societal factors. And it looks at a few really specific risk factors within each of those bubbles. So I'm going to draw your attention to, kind of the broad general tolerance of sexual violence within the community, in the community factors level. So one of the risk factors that we may see is that if there is a tolerance of this kind of behavior, and if we see a tolerance for this kind of violence in our community, then that may be a risk factor that we're going to perpetrate. So that is one of those kind of big picture things. But again, we're going to drill down to the relational and the individual level and look at, if you see the second big blue arrow that I just put up for you, it looks at risk factors that are associated with family environment. And so if you look under that, you're going to see physical violence is one, lack of resources, strong patriarchal system, and not a lot of emotional support. So those are a couple of things that you're going to see there. And then if you look down at the individual risk factors, you can see that strong beliefs around things like hypermasculinity, things like witnessing family violence as a child, coercive sexual fantasies. All of these things are potential risk factors for perpetrating sexual violence. And so I bring this up because this is what the research tells us. And if we pull this information back and look at this list of things that kind of shape healthy sexuality, you can see that looking at those things like gender roles, talking about consent, talking and modeling healthy relationships, these are the things that they line up with what the CDC tells us we need to be educating around and thinking about in terms of preventing sexual violence within our community. So the flip side of that too is we also have some protective factors, so things that may actually lessen the likelihood or provide a buffer against risk of first-time perpetration. And we don't have as much research on the protective factors, but I'll bring up a few of them that are relevant. So again, parental use of reasoning to resolve family conflict, emotional health and connectedness, and empathy and concern for how one's actions affect others. So really that healthy relationship piece and being connected to the family can be a very strong protective factor for the young people in our community. So if you want to get a full list, I'm going to ask Kelly to put a link from the CDC that includes the full list of risk and protective factors, so that you can refer to that if you would like. But just kind of laying the groundwork for the fact that this is really where we're going. We're looking at how parents can be the primary sexuality educators of their young people. And so I just answered my question here. The question of who are the primary sexuality educators of children. And I'll give you a minute just to check out our little cartoon here where he has a sex ed parent report card. So they got an A in anatomy and physiology, relationships, family planning, orientation, values education, communicating skills, parenting. Yeah, they made the honor roll. Because what we know is that parents and teens continue to say that parents really are the biggest influence on their decisions about sex. And, so often we think that peers and media and teachers and educators, that those are the people who have the biggest impact. But the reality is that parents and caregivers really do have an influence. So they're listening whether you think they are or not. And then this is kind of what it feels like sometimes, though. I think it's time we had to talk about sex. Yes, what would you like to know? That feels a little bit like the state of the union right now with social media, but that's okay, because what we're going to do is use social media and media in general as an opportunity to have conversations. So just a little bit more about the power of the parent. For parents who are communicating values and expectations, they may actually help support children in making healthy decisions about sexual behavior. When parents talk with their children and respect them, they have stronger relationships. Preteens whose parents communicate openly about sex are more likely to ask parents for help with other tough issues, i.e. more likely to disclose also if something does happen and get those resources and that support they need. Then I have a friend and colleague in the field who basically says parents should talk to their children about it because everybody else is. And so there are a lot of, if you talk with parents about this issue, then there are a lot of obstacles that I hear parents say in terms of their ability to start having these conversations about sex and sexuality with their young people. And I'm actually just going to ask you to type in the chat box for me really quick some of the obstacles that you know of, or that you have heard, or that you've experienced in terms of kind of opening up these conversations. So I'll give just a minute for people to respond. And while you're responding to that, I will tell you that there are some handouts that have been, I said this at the beginning, but just in case you weren't on then, there were some handouts that are downloaded into your dashboard, and one of them is an advocate's guide to an overview to healthy sexuality. It's from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, so you can go to their website to look at some of their tools on healthy sexuality. They're really good.
Okay, so we've got fear of not knowing how.
Okay, fear of not knowing how, great.
And embarrassment.
And embarrassment, okay. Anything else? Okay, yeah, so in terms of obstacles to having these conversations, those are definitely two of the biggest things. Fear of not knowing how to respond. I think also fear of not knowing the answer is something that we hear a lot. Being embarrassed absolutely is something that comes up a lot. And the reality is that the biggest obstacle and the biggest concern is just not having the conversation, because we can find out if the fear is, I don't know how, then we're going to talk through some tips here in just a second. If the fear is, I don't know where to find the information, what if I don't know the answer? There's nothing wrong with saying to a young person, you know what, that's a great question. I don't know, but let's find out together. And so sometimes it's more about knowing where to get information than it is about knowing the exact answer. And the embarrassment piece, absolutely, it's normal, and it is can be a very natural thing for people to feel embarrassed having these conversations. And again, there's nothing wrong with also saying that, and with saying, wow, I feel a little embarrassed about this, but I know that it's important for us to talk about this because I care about you, and I care about your life, and I care about the decisions that you're making. So let's work through this together. So there are definitely some of those obstacles out there, but I think with some of the tools and resources that are out there, I want parents to feel empowered to start having these conversations. So with that said, I'm going to talk through just a couple of general tips and guidelines to think about when you're having these conversations. So breathe. Yeah. The first time that your young person or a young person in your life, asks you a really complicated question, just remind yourself to take a breath and to try and get your heart rate to slow down just a little bit, because it can feel overwhelming. So just take a minute, acknowledge that it's a good question, and go from there. Excuse me, I've got allergies going on right now. So starting early. So when we're talking about sexuality, sometimes in the field we say, sexuality is really from womb to tomb. So there is, an aspect of healthy sexuality kind of at every phase. And so with young people, it's important to start early and to start having these conversations at an age appropriate level to try and help prepare them for making informed decisions down the road. And part of that with really young children is using real scientific names for body parts. And this one is big in the field of sexual violence prevention, especially because if we're not using, first of all, if we're using kind of slang words or made-up words for body parts, then the message that we're giving is that there's something shameful or inherently shameful about those parts of our bodies, right? And we want to get away from that because, they're just other parts of they're just parts of our bodies. And little kids want to understand those parts of their bodies just like their elbow or their ear, right? So we want to get away from messages around shame. But also, if we are using slang, then if a child is trying to disclose something to you, they may use slang or language that you don't recognize, and it's possible that you could miss it. And there are stories in the field of, kids using nicknames, for the vagina, for instance, the idea of using, nicknames like pocketbook or, sometimes actual name, like another person's name. If somebody's trying to do an interview with that child, they may not understand what they're trying to tell them. So this is a big one. So thinking ahead, that's part of what we're doing here and now is, kind of always trying to think about what the next sort of stage or phase is in having these conversations with your young person. So I've got a 6-year-old boy at home, so puberty is just around the corner. So I'm trying to really start thinking about the conversations I want to have with him about puberty, how, and starting to kind of prepare myself for those conversations that are coming up. If you've got teenagers, maybe it's conversations about, dating, all these kind of things, just kind of constantly thinking ahead. And really thinking, one of the things I always ask parents to think is, if there were one message that your young person were to take away from you about sexuality or, this part of their life, what do you want them to hear from you? Think about what's important to you and what you want to make sure that is communicated, and then live that out, model it, I mean, it really goes back to this idea of, actions really do speak louder than words, and our children see what we do. And that is probably the most powerful way of educating our young people, is by living out what we say we want for them. And then listening. So when they ask questions and your heart rate goes up and you get flushed and you get really nervous, sometimes it's helpful to just take a step back and ask, kind of why, what made them ask that question, or, did you hear this from somewhere else? Being willing to just breathe and listen to what they have to say. That's a really important piece of creating an environment where your children are more likely to come to you for information and to ask questions. And then start the conversation. And we're going to talk more about some tools for how to do that. Because sometimes this comes up when the young person asks you questions, and then some parents say to me, well, I would love to talk to them about it, but they're not interested and they're not bringing it up. So we'll talk about some ways you can do that. So really what we're laying the foundation here for is this idea of being an askable parent, because the more you show the young people that you care for, that you care about them, they may not remember every word you say, but what we want, it's kind of like a song. Sometimes you remember the melody, but you don't remember all of the lyrics. What we want the melody for your young people to be is that you care about them and that they can come to you. That's the song we're trying to kind of sing here for them, so that no matter what, they know that you care, and then they're more likely to come to you no matter how difficult the issue is to talk about. So how do we create and make ourselves askable parents? So in thinking through that a little bit, I'd like to ask you all to just take a moment and think about a time that you were told that you told someone something that was hard to tell, or that made you feel vulnerable to say out loud, and to think about how that felt for you. And if you can think about a time when a person made you feel good, they had a good response, what did they do, or how did they respond that made you feel that way? And if you're willing to write in, an answer to the second question in particular, kind of what they did to make you feel that way, I would love to hear those if you'd be willing to put that in the chat box. Because we're really looking for, how do we think intentionally about what it feels like to tell someone something difficult, or to ask a hard question, and to remember that that is what it's like for our young people when they're starting some of these conversations or asking some of these hard things. So, what's worked for us in terms of things that made us feel affirmed.
Okay, somebody says that they listened without judgment.
Absolutely. They listened, first of all, and they listened without judgment.
The person was very understanding.
They were understanding. Was it the last one? Okay. So listening without judgment,
Got another one.
being understanding.
Scared and nervous, listened but not lectured.
Listened but not lectured. Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so resisting the urge to, to problem solve, to talk over, to, kind of flip it around and make it a different conversation. So when people are willing to listen without judgment, to listen with empathy and understanding, that's when we're going to feel affirmed. That's what our experiences are, and the same is true for your young people. So think about those times and apply it back to when you're having these conversations with the young people in your life. And if you do that and you kind of frame it that way and frame your response that way, then they're going to be more likely to keep coming to you. So I'm going to switch gears and go through some resources that are available to you all. And all of these resources are out there. They're online. Kelly's going to be...
It's already been up twice. I put them all in twice.
Oh, you put all the links in. You just put them all in together.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so she's put all these links in. That's great. That's perfect. So she's got all of these links already in the chat box that you can flip to. But a couple of years ago, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center actually chose healthy sexuality as their theme for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and they created an entire toolkit of resources that you can look at. I uploaded a couple of them, like I mentioned, into the dashboard today, but you can go to that link and see all of them. So, you know, they kind of look at this overview of healthy development and healthy sexual development, because one of the things we have to think about is, you know, kind of, or one of the big questions we get is what's normal at what age, and what kind of questions are normal to get at what age. And so one of these tools is really going to break down what that looks like for you, this overview of healthy sexual development. There's also a tool called It's Time to Talk, which breaks out, you know, the importance of having these conversations with our young people, and then at the end actually gives a scenario that you could use to kind of start a conversation with parents. So it gives a scenario and then gives some talking points with that. So if you're a professional working with parents, that's something that you could actually use to have some more in-depth conversations with the people that you support. If you're not familiar with Advocates for Youth, they have, I would say, check out their resources. They're pretty great. And they have a specific parent sex ed center. So if you were to go there, and this is just a screenshot of the website, but they have all kinds of articles and activities and just lots of good stuff. And so I'm going to highlight a couple of them for you. And these links, the links to these specific activities, are actually in the chat box. So the first one is called How Well Do You Know Your Parents? And this again is just a screenshot of the actual PDF that you can download. But the idea behind this again is just going back to sending these messages that you care and that you want to know about your young people. So there are two separate ones. There's one that says, how well do you know your parents? And there's one that says, how well do you know your, I think it might say teen, I can't remember. And so there's just some really basic, kind of simple, innocuous questions here, like how did your parents meet? What color are their eyes? For a vacation, where would your mom prefer to go? And of course, these can be adapted to, you can adapt these to deal with what, if you have, predominantly single parents, single parent households or same parent households, you can just take these questions and put them in and adapt them however you would like. But the idea is that you have parents fill out the one about the teens, and you have teens fill out the one about the parents, and then you have them share what they wrote and have a conversation. And again, this is really just about building a foundation of care and of sharing values. So that's kind of a base level activity. This one is, called Attitudes and Beliefs. So this is getting a little deeper into starting some of these conversations about values and what I want for you, what I want as a parent or caregiver for you as a young person. And so it has people start to fill out some of these questions about what my mom might say or my father might say about love, about marriage, about sex, about birth control, pregnancies, all of these things. And you can take this idea and tailor it to put in, whatever kind of questions that you would want. But again, this is just a conversation starter, and you would just have the young person fill it out and then have a conversation with their parents about their answers. So there are a lot more tools and resources like this on that in this Advocates for Youth Parent Sex Ed Center. So I would highly recommend that you check it out. And also, if you are a professional who works with parents but also just does general education around sex ed and sexuality education and prevention, then you can go, if you look up here, you'll see there's a For Professionals tab, and you can go, they have multiple lesson plans, they have an evidence-based curriculum that you can access as well, all of that for free. So it's good stuff. Another organization that has some really great prevention and healthy sexuality resources is the Washington Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, and they have a series of I don't know what you would call it, maybe newsletter kind of things, magazines, newsletters. And one of the ones that they have is specifically looking at parents as prevention allies in our work. And so there's a link where you can actually go to that list of all the different resources that they have. But again, if you're a professional working with parents and trying to find tools and information for how to do that, I would definitely go and download that PDF because it has some really great articles and some really great ideas in it. So one of the things that we talked about, or that I mentioned in the beginning, that we need to be providing or having conversations around and providing information around is this idea of deconstructing the media. So there is a link included that is from a lesson plan from the Resource Center for Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention, and it's called Talking About TV. I think it's called Parents and Teens Talking About TV. It's not a terribly complicated name or title, but you can go to that to get some conversation starters for how parents can have these conversations about media with their young people. And this can be a really great way of starting conversations. I also put in the handout section a very specific tool that was created by, I believe it was created by Planned Parenthood, but it's an education guide for talking through television and media with your young person. And that is a really powerful way to start having these conversations, to ask, what are the messages that you're getting about relationships from this television show or this movie or this video, just kind of stopping and asking them. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. And that's one of the important things about this work is that we're not saying you need to have one conversation one time. We need to start early, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation throughout their life. So if I didn't make that clear before, I want to just go back and make that clear now, that it has to be an ongoing discussion. So when we have these little moments where there's a commercial or something like that, it doesn't have to be, a long, in-depth thing. It can be a 5-minute, like, hey, what did you think about that? What did you take away from that? Or here's what I saw. And just, finding these moments where you can, kind of interject some of those thoughts and values that you have and that you want to share with them. Sometimes when I ask parents, what's the best way to start a conversation, almost always one of the things that comes up is in the car. I start a conversation in the car because they can't get out. They're there, and they're a captive audience. And you don't actually have to make eye contact because, most often you're going to be looking at the road if you're driving, and they don't necessarily have to be looking directly at you. So that can be a great place, to start a conversation as well. It can be a little non-threatening, and there's a finite amount of time, so if you want to have a 5-minute conversation or 10-minute conversation, you can do it in a car ride that is going to be about that long. So, kind of finding these places to have these conversations is important. And this lesson plan from the Resource Center for Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention is one just kind of outline or guide to start giving some ideas and some talking points for having these conversations. Now, a big piece of all this too is figuring out how to start having conversations about consent from a really early age. And I will give Disney some props. They've actually done some good things around the issue of consent over the last several years. If any of you have young children, then you probably went through the Let It Go experience over the last couple of years and may even know all the lyrics to the song like I do. And in that film, there's actually a moment where he asks if he can kiss her. And that's a really nice moment. And, we hope, as those of us in the field, hope to see more of those kind of moments illustrated in films and movies as we go forward. There's actually a little song if you're familiar with Doc McStuffins, there's a song, I believe it's actually called the Robot Song, and I didn't put the link in for that, but if you really, really want it, then just email me and I'll find it for you. But there's a link where Dr. McStuffins has a whole song that's about tickling, and how if somebody says that they don't want you to tickle them anymore, that you need to stop. And if I didn't have allergies, I would sing it for you. But I probably wouldn't. But if you want a link to that, then let me know. It's really cute. It's well done, and it just kind of gets at the fact that we've got to start having conversations about consent early on. And now we're actually seeing some media that may help back us up as we're having these conversations. So there is an article that you can Google. It's called The Healthy Sex Talk: Teaching Kids Consent Ages 1 through 21 from the Good Guy Project. And, again, I don't think we put the link in for that directly, but you can just Google that, and it breaks down how we talk about consent literally from age 1 until 21, and kind of looks at age-appropriate ways to start introducing these conversations. Excuse me. And it's really well done, and it's very thoughtful. So I feel like that's a really good place to start when we're trying to figure out what we need to be talking about and when. So there's also some videos online. There's a video called Consent Explained with a Cup of Tea that you may have seen that kind of breaks it down. It's definitely for older kids. There is a version that has some language in it, and then there's a version that doesn't. So, depending on the situation, you can Google and try and find the non-expletive version of that video. But those are just a couple of things to think about when we're having these conversations, a couple of tools that you could use. And if you'd like more resources on the consent piece in particular, then feel free to reach out, and I can get you some of those. So all of that brings us back to, really wanting to look at how we as parents can be askable parents, how we can create that foundation, and how we can help educate our young people around, healthy relationships, and kind of shape healthy sexuality for them, and for hopefully help them learn what healthy sexuality looks like throughout their lives. And, by doing that, we are, again, doing the ultimate kind of prevention when it comes to sexual and domestic violence. So I'll give just a couple of minutes. If anybody has any follow-up questions for me, I'm happy to answer those. So. And again, while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, make sure if you want a certificate for the webinar, it's in your dashboard. So make sure that you go there and print that out before we sign off today, so that you will have that for your records. And that's where those handouts are that I've mentioned as well. Do we have any questions? Okay, it looks like there's not any questions at this time. Again, here's my email address. Feel free to reach out to me if you think of some brilliant questions after the fact. Otherwise, thanks for joining us this morning. We'll leave things logged on here for a minute so you have time to go and get those certificates and those handouts. And then, yeah.
Is the PowerPoint available for printing?
If you are interested in the PowerPoint, email me and I'll send you a PDF version. Yeah. Somebody just asked that. All right. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, great. Thank you all.